Hello and welcome back. In this week's episode, I ignore some birds and also answer the question whether it's worth upgrading the camshafts for a naturally aspirated G35 or 350Z with the VQ35DE engine. Alright, I break down the costs, analyze some numbers, and talk about my overall impressions after that. Alright, on to the intro. So I'm going to look at the numbers for two separate sizes of camshafts. There's the smaller cams, which I'm just going to call drop-ins for the purposes of this video, and those are the smaller. That's basically anything with less than 11 millimeters of valve lift, and those would include your Jim Wolf Tech C2 cams in S2 series and your Tomei Poncams. Typically, those are 262s. The larger camshafts, like the Jim Wolf Tech C8s or the Tomei Procam series, require aftermarket valve springs just to run. The VQ35DE is an interference engine, so if you don't run those, when your electronic VTC kicks in, your valves are going to hit the piston and you're in for a world of headache. So your stock 350Z or G35 with a DE engine is going to be making roughly 225 wheel horsepower. I'll be using wheel horsepower gains instead of crank just because aftermarket tuners typically measure gains at the wheels and not the crank. I'm also assuming that you're already full bolt-on and you're just looking for a little bit of extra power. The final component that will really put you up into HR territory of power. So let's get to it. Alright, first up are your Poncams. For $800 for the camshafts, you can just just plug and play, put everything back together, and you're good to go. So I figured that with Poncams, you're looking at either an $800 cost for the camshafts, or potentially $1,500 if you include the engine refresh. So breaking down those numbers, I arrived at $800 for 15 wheel horsepower, which equals $53 per wheel horsepower, or $100 per wheel horsepower with the engine refresh. For the larger camshafts, I'm assuming that your getting the heads machined and the valves lapped in, so that adds to the cost. I figured that for the Procams, you're looking at roughly $2,000 for all the parts and cost of machining, which would get you a roughly 25 wheel horsepower gain. So the math there equals $80 per wheel horsepower, or $108 including the engine refresh. Alright, so it helps to keep the definition of value in mind, the economic definition being the perceived, the measurement of benefit to the consumer. So ultimately, whether it's worth it or not comes down to your individual circumstances, opportunity costs like engine swap alternatives or forced induction aside. Right, so whether it's worth it, it's really all up to you. It's really all based on on our individual circumstances. For me personally, I love tracking my Z. My cam setup put down 310 wheel horsepower and 272 wheel torque on Z1's dyno jet. That's plenty of power for straightaways and corner exit. At this point in my my tracking experience, what would make me faster, what would reduce my overall lap times would just be more seat time. If you're building it for drift, I'm not super sure. You'd have to talk to somebody who's built their car for drifting. I'm assuming that NA is preferred just for the immediate throttle response. Not totally sure how much power you would need. I really just know that you probably want a welded diff for a two-way LSD in your Z or G for some good drifting. Street duty depends. Maybe you're just looking to, for street cred. Maybe you're just looking for HR numbers out of a DE as cheap as possible. It could be worth it. Maybe your stock Z got embarrassed on a highway by some Corvette, in which case you would basically have to resort to one of the alternatives, such as forced induction or engine swap, because no cams are going to, put you on par with a Corvette. I'm just using a Corvette as an example, but in that instance, I would say cams are definitely not worth it. But that's just my opinion. We're all entitled to our opinions, but it's not always as black and white as people often make it out to be. And that's the entire point of my video. Keep in mind, these are all like kind of baseline numbers and rough estimates. Ultimately, everyone's bill is going to cost different. Your mileage might vary. But yeah, what I'd like to think of with this video is that I've presented some information and my thoughts, and I'm just essentially letting you arrive at your own conclusions. So if you've enjoyed my content, feel free to drop a like, feel free to comment, ask additional questions, and please subscribe to my channel for more.